Music communicates. And every piece we sang had something to do with God. So you can never tell exactly what's going to happen. I remember an experience that I had as an organist at a concert where a little old woman came up afterwards and said, having heard that, now I'm not afraid to die. Now exactly what that meant in her spiritual transaction, I don't know. But she saw something beyond this earth, or she heard something beyond this earth in that music. That became a big motivator. So yes, it's a mission trip. You don't know exactly how God speaks, but some people have ears to hear music. His voice is very loud.
Why Denmark? Why did you take these kids to Denmark?
Well, I took the kids to Denmark because I was very familiar with the country. I studied there actually 5 summers, studied organ. Thereafter, for a period of about 2 decades, I went back frequently to play organ recitals, and in that process, learned to love the country, learned to respect it, knew the church music scene, knew the beautiful cathedrals in which to sing, and just wanted to share it with them all.
My Lord was a morning, 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 My Lord,
just lovely. They're friendly, they're pro-American, they genuinely like each other. They're very appreciative of good music. Their culture is a little bit more sophisticated than here in terms of art, music, literature. They have their own history of hymns and history of choral music and history of organ music, which is amazing and very rich for a small country, and just wanted to get involved in that and share that involvement with others. The way people behave and act is distinct from the way Americans behave and act. But it's one of the reasons we went, to experience other people. Danish people are very thoughtful, very deep, profoundly appreciative of great art and great music. So maybe some people wondered why they were unemotional during the concert. It's because they were internalizing it and listening for the first time. Don't forget, we Americans heard this music a whole bunch of times, and we had investment in our children. This is a one-time only experience for most of them. And the way I reported they reacted was exactly what I would have expected. So they took in the music seriously in the concert, and then they were effusive later. Well, we were very fortunate on this trip to have a singer go whose father is Danish, and that's Bjorn DeBear. You can't teach yourself Danish because there's a lot of sounds that don't exist in English at all. And so we had the fortune of somebody who could come in and correct us so that we could be convincing to the audience and honor them by singing in their own language. He spent hours with us. We never got it completely right, but we got it good enough that the people weren't offended anyway. Perhaps the most difficult piece to do regarding Danish was the girls' piece I Skal Skole Virgile, which is also difficult technically, and the girls that were on the trip before insisted on doing that again. Then I told them I didn't want to do it, and unless everything else was really going well, then I'd consider it. But I knew from the beginning I was going to do it. I just did that to trick him into working harder. But anyway, it's a children's song. It's a total fantasy about all the birds in the forest having a party. So the birds, different thing. The woodpecker, build a nice home and all this stuff. But at the end, an owl gets drunk. And there's no explanation for that, except that it's fun and it's funny, and the whole song is whimsical. And maybe that's the most whimsical part. And she ends up saying, "This is the worst day of my life." So maybe the lesson is, if you have a party, you got to have limits.
Yes.
If somebody comes to choir here, we're dealing with church music exclusively. Every anthem is a marriage between music and text. And if it's a good marriage, there's a good relationship. So it's impossible to thoroughly prepare a child or a teen or an adult to sing a choral work, whether it's a short anthem or a major choral work, without dealing with the text. If the music doesn't comment on the text, you might as well just say the words and not sing it. So whether you are a Presbyterian or a non-believer or whatever, we will always make sure everybody knows exactly what they're singing about, why they're singing it, and from which text originates. It takes a long time to decide what the concert repertoire should be, but I think about what is going to be good for the group that's going. If it's too easy, they're bored. If it's too hard, they're frustrated. I think about a variety of music, American music that they might not know and like to hear, their own indigenous music so that we know we respect their heritage and share it with them. But it actually evolves too as the choir develops. Sometimes I think of things to add and think things aren't working and just subtract them. So it's a process. I think we had success in that process this time. Well, when we were introduced, I was always pleased because it broke the ice, made connections. Sometimes we were introduced in good English, sometimes broken English, sometimes only Danish. I knew enough Danish to know what they were saying, and they said nice things. So I think it was good to have that opening connection when we were introduced. And of course, I'm proud to be an American, and I'm proud to visit Denmark. So I was very pleased to be presented as representing our country.
Som altså medvirker undervejs i forskellige numre. A most warm welcome to our American visiting choir. I'm very happy and pleased to welcome you tonight, and we've been looking much forward to your revisit, if I may say so. It's wonderful that you are so happy to be here, that you come back. We're very pleased about this. I wish you a wonderful concert and most welcome back again. All the best, and let us welcome tonight's choir.
A lot of the churches, particularly if they had enough time, gave us really nice receptions afterwards with all kinds of Danish treats. Danish people are enormously social. They make up a reason for having parties. They have parties all the time. One of the Danish terms is hygge or hyggelig, which describes how they cluster together. It's because the winters are horrible. There's 4 hours of sunlight and it's freezing cold and there's always snow. And the way they survive psychologically is they have parties all the time. One of the things that we did that was special this time, which we didn't do on the previous trips, was to try to interact with the audience in a very concrete way by giving each one of them a small Danish flag. There was a lot of reasons we did that. One is they're particularly proud of their flag. It's a symbol of what they love in terms of their country, and they're very loyal to their country. It's the oldest continuously used national flag in the world, so it's special for that reason, but also there's a tremendous amount of Christian influence on Danish culture, Danish social life, and the flag also has a cross. So I put a few things together, and that is, yes, we'll honor their country, but among the other things we would hope would happen is that the entire event would honor Christ, about whose music we sang. So we said it in Danish, but we gave everybody we could find a Danish flag and said, this is not only the Danish flag, but also the cross of Christ, so that they would know more about our message. Nonverbal communication is because in the choral process, we're speaking to each other through music. They're speaking to me through music. I'm speaking to them through gesture. But it's much more profound than that. And this may be too personal. It may be overload. A whole bunch of years. Well, you remember Annika, DeBear. And you remember Caroline and Hannah Corbin. Well, their grandmother, Sally, was junior choir mother very early on. And Hannah's father, and Caroline's father, and Annika's mother were in choir group the whole thing. Sally was the choir mother, so she saw me. And one day Sally said to me after choir, made me self-aware in a way that I didn't know, but was true. She said, you know, you look at every child that comes to choir as if they're your very own. I said, yeah, that's true. That's presumptuous, but it's true. Later in life, what I discovered is, I know why that's true, and that is I'm an adopted person. So adoptive people have two extremes. One is we're fantastically susceptible to rejection if somebody loves us. The other thing is we define family any way we want. And that can be very presumptuous. But when I see some of these children, often wish, oh, I'd like to take you home. I enjoy you so much. So I don't know exactly how this goes in, but that's where the nonverbal comes in. Because a property of children and teens is they intuitively know if you love them. And they intuitively know if you don't. And if you love a child and get mad at them and scream, they still know they're loved. And if you don't love a child and you're all Mr. Rogersy and sweet, they see right through it at once. And I know how to get this short, but that's the real answer to that question, and it's not easy to put that in capsule size. But that really is how I feel about all of those children. I was happy to have my daughter, grandson, and wife on the tour just for personal reasons and because I wanted to share. Sandra, my wife, had been on all the other tours. My daughter, Melissa, had been to Denmark with me 2 times before when she was in junior high and high school to hear organ recitals and just a tour. So that was a deep connection. I was glad to resuscitate that. And then she was glad to take it to the next generation for my grandson, Sawyer. A lot of musicians have to deal with the fact that when it's a performance, we get one chance to do it, and that's it. A visual artist can make some corrections, a poet can rewrite. We can't do that. So all live musicians, unless they're extraordinarily brilliant or dishonest, have to face that we make mistakes, and the groups we work with make mistakes. That's just part of it, and I wish I rolled with the punches better, but I don't always. But one thing I do know is, regarding this whole idea of perfection, there's a saying which is terribly wrong and terribly damaging, the saying that practice makes perfect. Practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. And by that, what I've discovered in life and others is the way you practice determines the way the performance will come out. If you practice well and with discipline, the performance is going to be convincing even if it's flawed. If you aim for perfection all the time, you'll be tied up in knots because you've made an unreachable goal. One of my responsibilities as we prepared this tour, or anything we do, is to monitor the choir, give them accurate feedback about what they're doing. So I never think about, am I going to be critical? Am I going to praise them? Do they need to be manipulated by feeling bad about themselves, or manipulated by feeling better about themselves they deserve? I never think about praising or criticizing them. I just think about what's going on. And if it needs to be changed, I'll tell them that it needs to be changed, and hopefully know enough to tell them how to change it. And if it's going well, I'll say that, not to make them feel good, but so they keep doing it. And that's the role. Some directors work on emotional manipulation. They control the choir by making them feel bad so they're anxious. So they'll do well to not feel bad. And others, worse in my opinion, is to tell them they're good when they're not. And then you control them emotionally, but you have no good music production. So I just tell it like it is. And if it's great, I'll say that's great. If it's lousy, I'll tell them it's lousy. And then they have to deal with it in either case. Steve! Start that one again. What's going on here? Somebody here was absolutely out of any kind of reference. I don't know who it was. But you guys have to pay attention. I know you're tired, but you have to pay attention. That's it. Hands at your side. Yeah. Somewhere in the pocket, somewhere a little place Mr. Tyson pointed out to you. Hands at your side. Ready? Elijah rock, shine. That's straight. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock is a coming along. Because you were slow. Take it from the second Elijah rock, shout, shout. Ready? Look me down with the shots of welcome. You're gonna have to. Come on. You're gonna give me my second heart attack now. It's not exciting to do that. It's immature to do that. Okay, and a choir that's hyper and out of control will do that. You are an authority. The concert especially, it's not the regular concert. I don't know how to predict what the audience will be, but whoever the audience is, you control them. They don't control you. So if you get out of control, you have lost their attention. So just trust me. This morning this was a train wreck. This was really out of control. I was not know what was going to say. Also, boys, come on. That particular place I've done with the professional choir several times. We go choir several times. No choir did that as a master. Guys, your pick with it is absolutely fantastic. The second one, the first one was good. The second one, Joshi. Okay. So you're absolutely not going to do all the way to no grade. Do what you just did. Absolutely do this. So start again in the same place. Everybody, absolutely terrific. I will lead this next. When I surrender, I'm singing home. When I surrender, sometimes people wonder why children put up with so much criticism and demand that I make. And there's some ideas that I have. I think the one thing is that most people have a desire to grow. A baby wants to roll over, and then he wants to crawl, and then he wants to toddle, and then he wants to run. And children in an activity that they're drawn to, such as music, want to do it well. And I think they subliminally understand that you have to work to do something well. So I think they accept it, knowing that they will show forth a good product for being criticized. Reads together. Jesus is a rock in a Jesus is. Don't cheat on his. Ready? Go. Jesus is a rock in a Jesus is and hold on his. Jesus is. Get it? Say the exercise. The other thing that I'm careful to do with all choirs of all ages is never tell them, do it because I told you to. I always give them a reason. If there's something that's difficult, something they have to repeat, something they have to redo, I'll tell them why, what the reward will be, and how that will impact the audience. I never am arbitrary with a child, or a teen, or an adult when I direct. That's a really sloppy thing. We started breathing there. We had been before. So carry through. Took your breath there and a hold. You have enough that you can support that. That's right. Beautiful. Eye contact is essential in a choir, not so much for an orchestra, but for a choir, particularly if they have it memorized, you can create that communication through the eye. Also, if they're not watching, they're going to start early and be embarrassed. They're going to cut off late and be embarrassed. And in rehearsals, every time, for no matter what, I demand eye contact. I play games with kids. One of the games I play is called the scare game. If they're not watching me, I will scream their name and make them jump out of their seat. And then they start watching. Or I play a game called Trap. They're in the trap if they don't watch. And the little kids that are hearing about this, or the bigger kids that did that, will know why. But without eye contact, the choir's dead. You have to have it. It's an essential. one of the bigger challenges was the long spiritual ain't no grave, and the kids liked that because they liked the challenge and it was energetic. So I think that maybe was a standout piece. They were extremely versatile because then they also sang Renaissance and Romantic music and other classical music equally well. So I'd have to say, in terms of favorites, I didn't have one. What I liked is their ability to make all of the songs come alive. Well, I think we had a very good boys section, better than I thought. And probably as they developed, if I'd have known from the beginning of the process, I would have done a little bit more because I didn't know how strong they would be. But probably the piece where they were the most effective was Sooner Will Be Done, when there was some lines with just boys alone that they just were fantastically full, rich, and confident. It was a terrific male section. A better male section than I have with my adult choir, a better male section than I even have with my professional choir in some ways.
Soon we'll be done with the troubles of the world, troubles of the world, troubles of the world. Soon we'll be done with the troubles of the world, come home to live with God. Soon we'll be done with the troubles of the world, troubles of the world, troubles of the world. Soon we'll be done with the troubles of the world, come home to live with God. I want to be my mother. I want to be my mother. I want to be my mother.
Going to live with God.
I want to be my mother. I want to be my mother. I want to be my mother.
Going to live with God.
Soon we'll be done with the troubles of the world, troubles of the world, troubles of the world. Soon we'll be done with the troubles of the world, come home to live with God. Soon we'll be done with the troubles of the world, troubles of the world, troubles of the world. Soon we'll be done with the troubles of the world, come home to live with God. No more ripping and wearing, no more ripping and wearing, no more ripping and wearing.
Going to live with God.
No more ripping and wearing, no more ripping and wearing,
No more.
no more ripping and wearing. There's no more
No more weeping.
Soon we'll be done with the troubles of the world, troubles of the world, troubles of the world. Soon we'll be done with the troubles of the world, come home to live with God. Soon we'll be done with the troubles of the world, troubles of the world, troubles of the world. Soon we'll be done with the troubles of the world, come home to live with God. I want to be my Jesus. I want to be my Jesus. I want to be my Jesus.
Going to live with God.
I want to be my Jesus. I want to be my Jesus. I want to be my Jesus.
Going to live with God. I'm going to live with
Well, continuing and thinking about the male singer, another piece that stood out is Elijah Rock, because they're places for the boys alone, but they particularly liked their part because they could snarl. There's this line, "Satan's a liar," and a conjure too, and I got them to snarl it out, and they felt kind of cool doing that. I guess they felt important, and sometimes.
Elijah Rock is a coming up, Lord.
Satan's a liar and a conjure too.
Just keep looking out, Lord, I'll conjure you. If I could, I surely would.
Just stand on the rock that Moses stood.
Rock Elijah.
When we make this tour, it's really important for the choir to know it's not just a cultural event, but a spiritual event. I want them to see it as sharing worship and sharing evangelically what the truth of God is. To prepare our hearts as well as our voices, we always started with a small worship time, which are devotionals. And I chose different teenagers to do it on the basis of my knowledge of them and their poise and their comfort with doing that. I thought about every young person to approach regarding devotionals on the basis of what I knew they would be comfortable to do, and that I knew they would have something really useful to share with me and their peers. One that stood out on reflection was Sam Scheibe toward the end. In fact, I think he did the last one. He had done a very beautiful one on the previous trip, so I knew he would do it well. But his was so outstanding that I told him to save it for sure. And he sings with the adult choir, and I made sure that he began the year by sharing that same devotional. And everybody that heard it was moved. The various people that I approached to do devotionals had different degrees of help that they asked for. Of course, I offered help in every case. Some I knew would just run with it, and others I gave some specific ideas. And some wanted me to screen what they were going to say, which I did. But I really wanted it to be their thoughts and their ideas, so there wouldn't be redundancy. And so I wouldn't be talking to the choir through someone else. They heard me for hours. They needed to hear somebody other than I.
Thank you.
thought Grace Rykaczewski was really remarkable in the concert, and she was, even though she didn't have that much outright solo work when we sang the most difficult piece of the concert, which was a Renaissance piece called Miserere. The composer called for a soprano to sing up to a high C. And there were a few in the choir that were capable of that, but she was the most comfortable to do it. But Grace is just a remarkably poised and talented child, very gifted, understands her role in a church choir as being primarily to honor God, and that's sort of the source of her confidence as well. I guess one of the reasons she stands out so much on the trip is she was the one that could hit the high C in Miserere, so everybody always looked forward to that because that was special. And that's a God-given gift. That's just the register of her voice. She is a music major. She's going to make this as her career. So the focus level there was very intense, as with some of the other soloists who were or are, who are going to be or are music majors. They're well-trained and they're highly motivated. We chose a lot of things to do besides sing, so it would be exciting and interesting, and also an element of pure fun and historical exposure, because there is a great heritage there. And that was easy to do because I knew the country really well. We had experiences from other tours. We knew what the boys and girls liked. And the tour guide was fantastic in giving some suggestions of what would be convenient in terms of our concert tour itinerary. To some extent, including Germany and Sweden was practical because they're close by and they are distinct. They're a little bit different, so we could get a broader exposure to some European culture. Here's people speak Swedish, which sounds different. Here people speak German, which sounds different. Some of the songs we sang were in German and in Swedish, so we could include their own culture in our presentations. And also for people who had been on the trip before, to give them something that was a little bit different.
Jesus is a rock in a weary land, a weary land, a weary land. My Jesus is a rock
Well, we had great tour guides, and we sort of came upon them by accident. On the second tour, the whole tour was arranged by an American tour agency, and they happened to hire the two guides that we had. On that tour, there was a real disaster because the American tour guide, unbeknownst to us, had gone bankrupt. And when we got into 2 or 3 days of the tour, he informed us that the buses were not coming, that we were not going to have anything to eat, and that we're having to leave the hostel, and he had no idea where we could go because he was out of money, and he never told us that. Fortunately, one of the adults on that tour was financially very strong and was able to dig into his credit card and rescue the trip. In the meantime, Elizabeth were our tour guides, and they knew it, and they said, if you ever do this again, this is our business too. We don't just get hired, we do the hiring. And if you do this again, we will do your trip, everything except the flights. Well, I was so grateful for that when we came to our third trip, I contacted them right away, and they did as I thought they would do, a fantastic job. So if I would ever do that, they would be the people I would go to, with no question. And I think everybody realized they were great tour guides. And we just liked them so much, they did such a great job, that we wanted continuous contact. And they informed us that they had their own business. So I was thrilled to hear that. Therefore, they did all the things except book the flights for the third and fourth tour. I was pleased, and as far as I know, everybody else was pleased with them. If we ever do it again, they'll certainly be the first choice. But in terms of solos in general, a lot has to do with what boys and girls show interest. Do they tell me they want to sing a solo? A lot of times the soloists, people said they wanted to do it. Like the youngest soloist was Annika. She came up to me one time and blew my head off in a rehearsal and said, I want to sing such and such as a solo. I didn't do that, but I did something different. So a lot of it has to do with their interest and what they want to do. The soloists in this tour were all very poised. I think it had to do with part of their desire to do it. They wanted to do it, so they anticipated being under pressure and accepted that beforehand. I didn't have to coach them very much about it. But the biggest thing is to be prepared, to spend as much time as they needed to be confident, do as many repetitions, to replicate it in rehearsals, what was the situation would be like. But think about it. In the rehearsals, they're singing in front of their peers, which is in some ways much harder than a bunch of strangers that they'll never see again. They're singing in the rehearsal in front of others that could have also have done that solo. So I think because of the intensity of the rehearsal schedule, they were pretty used to it by the time the real performance came. No choir ever sings better than their rehearsal accompanists. And we had built-in resources there because Carol for years has been the rehearsal accompanist for choristers on their weekly rehearsals and many of their performances, and Kathy, who's actually a professional associate here, has accompanied chapel choir for years and years. So they knew all the boys and girls, they already knew a lot of the repertoire, they knew how I direct rehearsals, my particular pacing. So they were just the natural people to do it. And their role is twofold. They had to be prepared to play parts and help me to train the boys and girls, but then they had to be able to perform exactly as written the accompaniments, which they did all the way through this trip, very poised and very strong and very professionally. So they really helped that trip to succeed. Without accompanists of their caliber, we couldn't have done it.
We sing to him whose wisdom from the ear. Our souls let him who gave us voices hear. We join God who is the spring of birth, who loves the harmony of heaven and earth. Our humble sonnet shall the praise rehearse, who is the music of the universe. And whilst we sing, we consecrate our heart, and offer up with every tone our heart. And whilst we sing, we consecrate our heart, and offer up with every tongue our heart.
Well, the featured soloist, if I could use that term, was Gwen Wilkie, insofar that she was the only one who sung a standalone solo. Gwen was in the choir from 4 years old. On other tours, when I had particularly gifted and experienced singers, I had them sing a solo or two just on their own, and she was clearly heir apparent to that. And I chose the song for her that I did choose, although she participated in it, is it just fit her voice really well. And it fit well into the classical group. And also English was the native language of Purcell, so she could add to the English repertoire quite naturally. And one of the advantages of being in the Presbyterian Church in Moorestown is it's small enough that I get to deal with every age group, and it's large enough that I get to do some really neat things. So sometimes a child will come as kindergarten child and then sing all the way through. I call them lifers. Sometimes they'll start early, like Lauren Clark, who started as a 4-year-old child, and so she was in her 14th year of choir when she sang this concert, and was her second concert. Then you might have somebody like Gwen Wilkie, who also started early and came back as a college student and was on her third tour. So there's deep connections that come out of children like that. See them once a week for most of their life. We don't necessarily have to have a lot of verbal communication. The nonverbal communication is very strong with those long-term members. When you direct a choir, you can discover all kinds of levels of interest, all kinds of levels of motivation, different characters of voice, different quality of ear. And one of the things to do is to discern talent that might be hidden, somebody that really could be a stellar soloist and don't know it. So I try to encourage boys and girls like that. If a child comes to me and said they like to sing a solo, I will always respond. Sometimes a young singer or anybody of any age is really gifted but not confident in their gift. And that's a distinct but related skill to build. So one of the things that I do then is to try to bring them in touch with who they are. Your voice has this kind of beauty. Your ear is so good. You have such a sense of style. To bring them in touch that they really have something to offer and that is wanted and people will appreciate it. Then the hope is that they'll begin to be confident in the fact that they are good, that they can do it and they can develop. And the purpose also in singing in a church is not always or really ever focused on how we're going to be received, but what we're going to give to God, which really gets them off of their self. It's something I have to tell myself too, and don't always succeed.
Der blåa nattens ljus
Sitting out there and looking at me, and that kept the tempo, so that's how we'll do it. Well done. Now then can segment, boys don't you? I could think of a list longer than this documentary could be of things that were surprising to me. One that stood out, Ava Gandy came up and said, I think I'd like to sing a solo. She never showed the slightest interest before. So I sort of said, okay. And then when she sang, was blown away. But she was a giant surprise in that regard. And I think since then she's gotten more serious about her solo singing. Actually, since then, she's sung a couple times in church, and that was one of the really nicest surprises of the trip.
In the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, give me Jesus, give me
There were a lot of leaders that surfaced on this trip, and not all of them were the chaperones or helpers, but some of the older kids were very impressive on this trip. Really, all the older kids were instrumental and bonded with the younger kids and made it intergenerational. There's one I just have to think of that was very special. It was the second trip for a college student named Andrew Cates. He was very impressive all the time. And there are two things that jump to mind. One is we ended up having to change living facilities at the very last minute and had to go into a place cold that wasn't ready for us, and it was baggage all over the place, and nobody knew where to go, and it was a mess. And he just took over. He even took over for the tour guides. He got this all organized in an amazing and very winsome way. He was authoritative without being bossy, and that was terrific. The other thing that many people might not know about Andrew is he's a triple major in college. And he wanted to go on this trip. And his parents' terms were fine, you pay for it. So he paid for that. He got jobs. He did everything possible. Now, he may not be the only one, so I hope if any other older people contribute in that way, they don't feel slighted. He's the one I was aware of. And I was very, very impressed with that. And the amount of giving that he gave on all levels is just amazing to me. In all these different churches, the acoustic was quite different. So part of the process that I had to go through is to listen to it from a place that would be representative audience. How is it coming together there? A difficulty about directing is that in front of a choir, and particularly in front of an orchestra, it doesn't sound the way it's going to sound in a room. You have to go back to see how the sound converges. So since I know the Moorestown Church well, I almost never do it here, but even sometimes I'll do it here. But those churches I didn't know, some I was never in before, and others not for a long time. So I would have to go down and hear with the seating arrangement that I made, or the standing arrangement, which we referred to before, how does that translate into sound? So I did that a lot. If I walk away from a group when they're rehearsing to hear it in the room, I'm really checking balance more than anything, because sometimes there are sound tunnels, and depending on where you're standing, a section might be projecting more readily than another. Then I have to make the adjustment of changing the way they actually sing and telling them to come up or down, or rearranging how they're standing. If it's blatant, that I have to just put them in a different spot. So it's balance and blend more than anything else. And also, is their text clear? In the room, are their consonants crisp and clean? No matter what the language is, that defines rhythm, so I have to see that their diction is right for the room. And physical placement of choir is a major deal in terms of having them blend and form. And some of it is simple as, where do you have to stand to see well? Who's too tall to sing around? And some of it is purely pragmatic. Sometimes we sing in sections, so we want altos, sopranos, tenors, and basses together. Sometimes we will hash and completely mix up for acoustical reasons and tuning reasons. So when we sang in all these different churches, sometimes we were on flat, sometimes we had a few risers, sometimes we had many terraces. So that was a challenge in the warm-up to get that arranged in a way we could hear each other, see properly, and blend with each other. That's just part of the technique of being a director, to get it right. And sometimes if we're slow to do it, I'd have to yell at them to not waste time. But that's part of the job of a music director, to make sure the choir is visually and auditorially arranged in an effective way. The warm-ups were difficult by distractions, such as people setting up cameras, walking around, making noise, and so forth. Well, it's my job to ignore that. That's just what you have to do. Motivated highly by fear. If I don't get it right, I don't have another chance. So it's easy to focus in that situation, really. There's just no choice. Yes, that was a nice event when we were in Germany, and we had two distractions. In a song about the lights being lit, they went out, and in the meantime, a bat flew out from somewhere and was flying around. And actually, that was quite an advantage, because that gave me a reason to really make them focus, to ignore the bat, because they were scared. The consequence is, on our recording, quite a few pieces were successful in that setting, even though the acoustic wasn't good. They listened to me and they focused away from the bat and onto their music. Yeah, one of the most scary moments was toward the end of the trip when we sang at Vorfrausers in Copenhagen, a church I'm very familiar with. But they had given me some problems, and that was just another, and that is they didn't prepare for us, and we had to quickly set up the risers. I think they just didn't do it. So we had to co-opt some of the bigger guys and some of the men to do that at the last minute, and that was quite scary. However, it was worth it, because that's one of the most historic churches, and for anybody that saw the organ, it would be interesting to know that the facade of that organ, the pipes, were original. They were built in 1699. So think of it this way: Bach was 14 when those pipes started to speak. So it was a room that was worth struggling with, but it was a struggle. Well, the organ was my first musical love. When I was growing up, they always broadcast from the Mormon Tabernacle every Sunday night. My parents would play that. And there was a half hour, and it was a lot of choral music, but I couldn't wait to hear the organist. That was my first love. And as I grew up, it stayed primary. I was an organ major, and did my most important organ study in Denmark for 5 summers, as has been mentioned. And then I played a lot of recitals all over the place on those wonderful organs all through that country. As time passed, though, some of the organists who had heard about my choirs wanted recordings, and I gave them, and then they said, "Why don't you bring a choir?" So I did that, first of all, in 2006. And from that point, I realized how valuable that was and how much more was accomplished by a whole choir than just by playing the organ. And my focus shifted at that point, and has sort of stayed more focused on choirs than organ ever since. Well, one of the things about being in Denmark is it's a maritime country, and there's boats all over the place, and swimmers, they swim when they almost have to break a hole in the ice to swim, all year round. So next to the hostel in Denmark, there were several places from which you could swim, and that's something I was looking forward to seeing and being a part of. So I really liked that they jumped in. I didn't care when or what, as long as there was somebody to watch them. seemed to me through the trip that nobody complained about the food, which I was glad for. But of course, Danish food is not exotic, but it is distinct from ours. And a lot of why we eat what we eat there is it's a Nordic country. Their growing season is very short. They have to import a lot of things. So meat and potatoes is a big deal there. They can grow grass. But I was pleased with the food personally. Of course, I was used to it. And I also told the kids a little bit about what to expect. So I didn't see any kids grossed out and turning things away. They had a good time eating it. I surely did. And we told them where to go for bakeries, and they particularly liked that. Well, one of the things regarding food that I wanted everybody to do is to taste real Danish pastry, which is nothing like what we have here. So Elizabeth, the tour guide, knew that. And on the previous trip, one girl had her birthday, and the mother arranged to bring all those Danish treats for us. But Elizabeth took it on herself because she knew what a big hit it made. And I think everybody was really happy for that. I surely was. Well, having multiple members of a family in choir is something that has been present since the time I came here. And I think the natural explanation is music is highly genetic, and it's unusual in a family to have one child that loves to sing and another that doesn't love to sing, or one child that can sing and another child that can't sing. So I think that's just built into the fabric of the choir system here. And it's another shared experience. If this trip was special in its unique way, then that's another special bond and memory that those siblings can have, I hope, for the rest of their lives. I think the thing that makes it natural for the high school choir to succeed is that I just find them very rewarding, and I just enjoy them very much, not just as people, but as musicians. Actually, what made me want to become a choral conductor when I was in college, and my intention in college was to be a concert organist, and I decided to work in a church and work with choirs because it's just the price I'd have to pay to work with choirs, in the middle of my college career, a director came who had come from Detroit at a technical school there, and his high school choir sang incredibly well, the Bach B minor Mass, the Mozart Requiem. I can list a lot of major works. And that made me really excited about choral directing, but particularly the potential of teens. Now, I don't have a magnet school where I can rehearse them twice a day every week, but I have talented boys and girls, and I see in them the ability to do really profound things and really artistically high things. And then the fact that I enjoy them as people makes it all that much more pleasurable. And there's all kinds of personalities that come. There's some that are very extroverted, jump all over and outside of themselves. And there are others that you can see quietly contemplating the music and getting deeply into it. They're all equally valuable. And that's why at the trip I evaluated all of their personalities, because it's not just a variety of voices that make a choir, but a variety of personalities and characters and emotional states. So some of the kids might seem quiet in the background, but the choir would be lost without those types as well. As I've been lucky enough to be surrounded at most times with teenagers to work with that want to sing, I think it comes naturally because if you like to sing, you like to sing together. And so the high school choir has been strong for years because friends bring friends. And I count on that, and I really ask them to keep doing that. I think another thing that makes it possible is I'm aware of different periods of life where it's particularly dangerous. And I believe that choir should be a safe place. And I think that a lot of times boys and girls come and I think they're consciously safe because they know they're loved and they know they're valued. When seniors graduate, I do a couple of things. One thing is I make sure the last performance is so hard for me that I can't think about what's happening. But I also tell them this is always their church, this is always their seat. As much as they want it, they're always welcome back in the room. And those that are highly motivated have been good choir members, so I'm always comfortable that they can come back and sing. I know they'll do it well. And it means something to me because they might be distant physically, but they're not distant spiritually and emotionally. And for a lot of them, if they come back and I haven't seen them for a while, it's really like time has not passed. So I'm very happy when that happens.
What is your personal hope for the future of the choir at First Presbyterian Church?
Well, I've been working here at the Presbyterian Church for 48 years. I've been working with traditional church music, which some people think isn't important, but I do. an eclectic hymnal like we have has 56 generations of hymn writers, and I want those things to stay in the life of the church. So I'm hoping that the choral tradition here and the hymn singing tradition here will never stop. There's no reason for it to. The things that we do are valuable forever, and so certainly I hope that the tradition will continue. In addition to Kathy and Carol Mannion as colleagues on the trip, the other colleague that went on the trip was Stuart Spencer, the pastor of our church, and he was only having completed 1 year, so it was a very new experience for him. And I think what I appreciate the most is as this trip approached, he really exhorted the congregation to pray for the safety and success and mission of the trip. Really almost in an organized way. He mentioned it in church a number of times, but then he actually organized day by day. He took the schedule and set out where we would be and what we were doing, and solicited the congregation's prayer support for the whole trip, which was very meaningful, and I was aware of that. And on the trip, we had devotions, but many times he would interact with them too, and made his spiritual presence felt in that regard. So that was a fine asset for us to have had. Yeah, continuing thoughts about what could have been happening behind the scenes. One of the really active families was the Ransom family. They had gone on a third trip and just enjoyed it so very much. So among the ways they contributed is they were big recruiters. They really talked to parents about this is worth doing, this is going, and I'm sure some of the people on the trip went because of their influence. And then they're both educators. Harris Sr. was a school principal for many years. Melody is a teacher, so they are both engaged with the development of young people, the education of young people, and so did all kinds of things all the way through just to prosper the trip and to make it work. There was also a case where their son, younger Harris, was quite small on the trip and grew enormously, so it was interesting to see how he would perceive it as a young child and then as a young adult. So they were a particularly interesting family in that regard. One of the assets of this trip was Jerry Tyson, who was a fine photographer, but also was the recording engineer. And I chose him for the trip because he was chosen by the church before I ever came here. He was recording concerts that preceded me, and he's recorded many of our concerts since then, all the youth choir concerts. He went on the first, second, and third Denmark trip, gave us really good recordings and photos, so he was surely the natural choice to do it again. And by this time he also had learned on his own sort of the pace and the rhythm of the trip, so I never considered anybody other than Jerry for that. But I want to tell you what I want to do now with everybody that's a singer. And that is, when you sing, your voice is making the sound, but the song is not coming from your voice. The song is coming from your heart. And we've been together a lot, and everybody has a lot of personal attributes. People are multifaceted. But I want to talk to every one of you individually to tell you what I think your heart did for the choir. The choir is not just a collection of individuals, it's a composite organization, a composite organism, but it's able to function because people bring different things to it. You're not all the same. And the fact that you're not all the same is what gives the choir strength and vitality and dimension. And your temperaments and your priorities and your values all blend together to make the song. So again, I've thought about each one of you and what you brought to it. And what I'm going to say is certainly not all that you brought to it. And what I've noticed may not even be your best attributes, it's just what I've noticed. So I'd like to take a moment with each of you one at a time up front and just tell you how I've appreciated you, what I think you've done to make us be a successful choir. So we'll just come up one at a time, and I guess I'm going to go somewhat alphabetically, and let's have Gio come forward. Well, my favorite part of the trip was toward the end when I got a chance to talk to every individual teen or child that sang, to characterize what I saw in them and what I appreciated about them. And I did spend some time thinking about it, what was making them unique. A choir is very personal, but it's not individual. So that was the only chance I had to be individual with all of them. I wish it was more. I wish it had been an hour or 2 hours with every one of them. And for some it was very sad, because I knew it would be the last choral experience I would have, likely, with those boys and girls. But you sing the way you are. Your personality comes through your voice. And so it's not just a collection of different sounding voices, it's a collection of different temperaments. All of that adds up to, can the choir sing sustained? Yes, the calm children can do that. Can a choir sing excitedly? Yes, the more energetic kids can do that. So they needed to know how I appreciated what they brought to the scene. And yeah, that was my best part of the trip for me. The Forever Songs, which are pieces that I wrote quite a few years ago, it was my first experiments in writing music based on the poem of a child. And in that case, the child was not a part of the choir, but was a student at a school where my wife taught, and realized that she was a very insightful young girl and showed me her poems, and I loved them. And I think the context at that age, children begin to discover that some things don't last forever, that we have loss in life as well as things that we can keep. And most of the poems talk about that. The last one, she's having the kind of a fantasy, half dream, which children have when they look at the sky and they see images in the clouds and enjoy it and wish they could go up there. And toward the end of that, she realizes, no, the clouds are dispersing and they're going away, and she wishes she could be there forever. So they're called forever songs on that basis. But they have deep meaning for me, because I wrote them for my wife, and I told her I'd love her forever, which I will.
Oh
Well, I've been doing choirs since I'm 14 years old. That's the first time I stood in front of a choir. So this is a long time. And I'm not quite sure how I evolved, because it was an evolution. And you don't see things clearly that happen gradually. So I'm not sure how much I've changed, except maybe I've become more aware, because of feedback, of what happens in a choral situation personally and inside of people, and what happens to audiences when I hear them, because I don't experience that. I'm not in the audience, and I'm not in the process in the same way. But I think I've learned to understand that choir, if it's done well, can be a safe place and a nurturing place for each other, and for me to them and them to me. Some of the choir members I love the most. It's selfish, because my job is mainly to give a good experience for the children, the teens. But when they give something back, even sometimes it's just a smile, it's an amazingly rewarding experience. So I think that level, a little hard to define, which is personal and relational, is a bigger thing for me now. Well, among the people that have been so helpful for the tours and just in general are Ken and Lucine King, who just have encouraged me fantastically through all the projects that I've done, and not just the big trips, but concerts and everything else. Sent me 3 wonderful singers, a great poet in Shannon, who shared many personal hours with me, but also in terms of wanting to preserve, in a way that is probably much more demonstrative than just recordings, though they're very important, the essence of the trip, for the remembrance of everybody that went. So I'm tremendously grateful to them for fostering this film production, and for the personal attribute they've been to me, and encouragement for really as long as I've known them. I can't remember doing anything specifically different for the last performance, because the same technical adjustments pertain there as anywhere else. I worked hard not to think of it. I didn't particularly want to be too aware of what was happening, because I wouldn't have been able to carry on if I had. But the last church, as the sun was setting, it changed angles through the glass, and it changed the light on the choir from one kind of beauty to another. And I was very well aware of that. I just simply enjoyed it for the visual content. Didn't do anything to the performance. I just liked it a lot and hoped the cameras were capturing it.
How do you think that the First Presbyterian Church perceives the value of the tour?
Well, sometimes people wonder, for those who weren't on the tour, how they perceive it, and I have no way to know that. I do know that some financial support came from people who didn't go or couldn't go, so they have, at least in abstraction, the sense that something good can happen. We make the pictures available as much as we can, and I think people just experienced in life know that when you go to another country, you come back with part of it forever, and know that, particularly if they came to hear our performance, which we gave in the church before we went, that it was a well-disciplined choir that was singing beautifully. But I guess there's as many answers to the question, how did the church perceive it, as there are individual members. Probably all see it differently, and I hope they saw it as a worthwhile adventure. And I hope those who went on it saw it as a worthwhile adventure. I guess the last official thing of the trip was at the end of the concert. Amy had organized what was in a sense a reception, like a line to walk through. It wasn't a gauntlet, so they didn't hit me as it went by, but they did hit my heart by saying thank you as a group. And I can just say you're welcome. What I'm saying is, this film will be available for people that want it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a big gift will be for all those, to keep this alive for them, and when to remember it. This Denmark choir was the best choir I ever had. There's no choir that's in the same realm. So at least for me, at the end of I mean, much closer to the end than the beginning for me. This is a personal thing for me, that I'll be able to relive this, be able to remember it, because I think it's my best musical achievement, this choir, for sure, for certain. You and they are giving me a gift of enormous value.
Okay.
All right.
We are, just so you know, we are wrapped, and we are going to.
You made it easy.
We're going to have a lot of work to do to